Here's an experiment for you. Take passionate experts in human resource technology. Invite cross-industry experts from inside and outside HR. Mix in what's happening in people analytics today. Give them the technology to connect. Hit record. Pour their discussions into a beaker. Mix thoroughly. And voila, you get the HR Data Labs podcast, where we explore the impact of data and analytics to your business. We may get passionate and even irreverent, but count on each episode challenging and enhancing your understanding of the way people data can be used to solve real-world problems. Now, here's your host, David Turetsky.
Hello, welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I'm your host, David Turetsky, alongside my friend and trusty co-host from Salary.com, Dwight Brown. How are you, sir?
I am great, David. How are you doing?
I'm freezing. It's still dead of winter here. It's 26 degrees outside, and I wish I was in Phoenix, Arizona with my friend Dwight.
Just so you know, it's 67 degrees here right now.
That does not make me feel better. As my toes are freezing.
I love it. I love you, brother.
Yeah, 32 here in Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C. And that is from our guest, Amy Butchko. Amy, how are you?
I'm good. I wanted to be into the weather conversation here because I'm watching the snow come down here as we speak.
Oh, so it's snowing there in Washington, D.C. Wow.
Yes.
So you got cold temperatures and the snow to go with it. That's just a treat.
And we're just going to actually have an HR Data Labs fetch session about wet weather while we're at it. That's all this is going to be now. All right. This is we've evolved into this.
Okay.
I'm kidding. Amy, welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. How are you?
I am a little on the chilly side here, but it's a beautiful, picturesque, snowy day here I'm actually in Northern Virginia, which is close to where my employer's headquarters is in Tyson's Corner, Virginia. So, but it's absolutely beautiful. We've not had really appreciable snow in this area in over 2 years, though, so it's a novelty.
So you might want to take a picture for next year's Christmas card, is what you're saying.
We've been doing that, yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Amy, why don't you give us a little bit about your background and about who you are?
Well, I am a talent acquisition vice president at a company called Maximus, which is headquartered in Tyson's Corner, Virginia, as I said. And in my role, I am focused on delivering IT hires at scale. Maximus' mission is driven around delivering service at scale to citizens through governments around the world. So it is an exciting and a heartfelt mission for all of us here. And my little slice of it is delivering the IT talent that helps enable the automation and some of the systems that those services use.
Excellent.
So that's what I do right now.
So, Amy, do I understand it correctly that you're working on a book?
Oh gosh, yeah. In my dreams, I'm actually a frustrated potter and a brand new golfer, so I really don't have time for such things like writing. So that's why I do stuff like this.
Oh well, that's okay. We love having people on who use their creativity for vocal reasons. That's totally cool.
Exactly.
So, Amy, what is one fun thing that no one knows about you?
So I typically like to take on challenges that I am not guaranteed to win, which is why I took up golf last summer. It was a very neat fit because I'm not good at it yet. And I may never be. I mean, if you ask me, I don't know if you two play golf, but boy, it's frustrating. So
the reason I don't play golf is I have enough frustration in my life that I don't need one more thing. So
yeah, well, I like to say that my pitching arm gets really good when I play golf. You know, I play the Caddyshack way.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm still just learning to be a good golf citizen on the course. And truth be told, I injured myself a couple of years ago. I flew off my bike. And so golf is a safer hobby, even if it is a little bit more frustrating than biking. But it has kind of helped me rehab my wrist. So that's been fun. And that's, so people don't always know why I came to golf. So that's a little bit about me.
Golf is safer than bicycling, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Don't pick any of the things that Dwight would do.
Right.
Not bicycling, but actually paragliding,
Jumping off mountains and cliffs. And
jumping off of perfectly good airplanes, right?
no, I don't jump off of airplanes. I don't skydive.
Oh, I thought you did skydiving.
No, nope.
Oh, crap.
Believe it or not. But, yeah.
No, please don't do that now.
Yeah, don't throw me off the plane.
Yeah, whole new
No,
level of
exactly.
risk. So.
Yeah, no. Anyways, so wonderful to have you here. And so our topic for today, which is really fascinating, is 4 steps to get results with using data for enterprise talent acquisition. So, Amy, what is the biggest challenge in talent acquisition today?
Hi, we're Meg and Amy from The Meg and Amy Show.
We're not only tech execs and big picture thinkers, we're also best friends.
We're curious learners. And on this podcast, we're challenging the status quo and activating the future.
And we're going to give advice about work and leadership, right, Meg?
You know, we can't help ourselves. But this podcast is about exploring possibility, not being right.
That sounds refreshing.
For more, tune in to The Meg and Amy Show.
So, David, it kind of depends on what you read. But right now, it's just kind of figuring out where you're going to find your next hire and how quickly you can do it. So, you know, in what I do with IT work, it's a notoriously small pool of talent relative to the number of openings. And that is still true even with the recent gyrations in the labor market. But what we find is that, you know, it is difficult to find folks that have the right match of skills. In the case of government contracting, which is my specialty over the years, it's been, you know, finding people with the right clearances, people who want to work on site, on government facilities, that kind of stuff. So it introduces a level of complexity that becomes challenging and, you know, and makes it even more fun to do than you could ever imagine.
I could imagine, actually, because having tried to find qualified talent in the past, it just seems maddening, especially trying to find, as you say, there's a mix of skills and licensure and other things. How do we do it? Where do we go? What do we do?
Oh gosh, well that is beyond the scope of this for sure. But you know, well, I think it depends on. So one of the things that I have benefited from in my career in talent acquisition is really specializing and getting good at finding IT talent is what I do. And, you know, and I typically have done it in the government contracting space, which is probably, you know, a slightly different flavor than what you would find in private industry, but you'd be surprised because the overlap in technologies is significant. And we do pull people out of all sorts of private industry into ours. GovCon is great because of the resilience of our industry. You know, we don't typically struggle with the same types of ups and downs with funding. However, working, you know, many of these companies, including Maximus, is a publicly traded company. So, you know, you are on the hook for, you know, making sure that you've got the right people to do the jobs that we signed up to do for our clients. And that's something that every company can do better, probably.
So if you take it from the perspective of, okay, now we understand what the challenges are, how do you measure, or how can you look at the talent acquisition world and figure out, are we measuring the right things? Is there a data problem here?
Short answer, yes. And, you know, and what's interesting about the figuring out what to measure question, big enterprises often have a surplus of data. And when you start getting into, you have so many different metrics that you could measure, but then which metrics actually are impacting the business that you're trying to improve, right? So there's risk on focusing on too many things at once. So this is also kind of where my specialization brain has worked to my favor in the data space, is being able to kind of filter out what I would view as noise or figuring out what is the noise.
Right.
You know, smaller organizations, people, you know, folks that are working in organizations that maybe don't have as much data or collection mechanisms that are not as robust. Like, you know, we all hate our applicant tracking systems. That's not news to anyone, but they're really useful they're really useful. One of the reasons we hate them is because they collect all those little bits of data. And, and then, once you flip it over and you start looking on the other side of things and all that data starts to come out, then it really starts to get interesting. And then that applicant tracking system doesn't seem quite so onerous anymore. So, that's the kind of thing where a big enterprise can make a big difference and really start to look at what's going into their applicant tracking system and how the recruiters are using that applicant tracking system to figure out how to make hiring more effective.
That's really interesting. Because so often we hear we don't have enough data. That's our biggest challenge. We don't have enough data. And what we're hearing from you is I think you said you have a surplus of data, and now it's just a matter of figuring out what to do with it.
The thing that is really important is finding people who can help bridge the gap between all of those little seemingly irrelevant data points, right?
Right.
And turning them into something that looks actionable or looks like an executive could understand it without knowing, like David wants to understand how to do, recruiting this afternoon. Yeah. So I think it could be both. And, and without knowing a particular organization's constraints, less data is probably not the problem. Too little data is probably not the problem in modern times.
Which in a way is ultimately when you have too much data, you don't have enough data is what it comes down to.
Right.
You don't have the right data with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you just don't have a way to aggregate it and look at it, or maybe you don't know what you're trying to measure. So, so, a nugget that would probably be useful to your listeners are some of the things that I think are relevant. And, whether you're looking at recruiting labor cost or time to fill or time to start, those are two different things. Sometimes it takes a while to get the right person on board, even if you've identified that person. What are your tools costing? What is your cost per hire? What is your hiring volume? What is your net promoter score, right? Like these are all data points that can inform a talent process, but, without a way to really cogently look at it and say, okay, these are the things that are impacting my business today, and which ones am I going to focus on to manage my team?
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking subscribe. This podcast is made possible by Salary.com. Now, back to the show.
I think there are a couple other metrics, though, that kind of go to what you were talking about acumen around not just understanding the data, but also understanding the process itself, which is things like my sources, my best sources of hires, or the most diverse sources of hires, or what's the productivity gain from the latest sources. So, what's my time to productivity with sources as well? So if there are a couple of really great schools that I'm getting new hires from, and they're in certain roles, if I'm getting better productivity out of certain schools than others, we should be targeting them more. So I guess what I'm asking is, how do you build the acumen in your TA organization or in HR to be able to look at those metrics, figure out which ones are the right ones for them to drive those business outcomes you were talking about?
The first thing that I would do is say that, the rec type, what is the actual requirement that needs filling? And so I would be looking at it from the perspective of how much experience does a person need to be hired into a certain role. I'm going to break that into 3 chunks just for simplicity for this conversation. You've got your entry level early career span. You've got your experienced, but maybe not yet expert level person. In IT, that would be your senior developer, your data analyst, your senior data analyst, those types of folks. And then at that in that top level, from an individual contributor perspective, you would have your architect type level. And arguably, so you've got that chunk. So we're gonna take those 3 levels, and then I'm going to also bring in a concept that is really important in today's market, and that you're probably starting to hear, which is skill-based hiring. But what that really means is that we care more about the skill of the individual than the pedigree of the school that they came from, which means that your source of hire becomes much more difficult to say, well, all my best candidates come from MIT, or I get my best tech talent from Stanford, right? Because what really ends up mattering is, and the most important question that you can be asking is, what does a person need to know how to do to be effective in this job? And I would argue that at that entry level, you have one answer to that question. At that mid-level, which is a really big level, as where the vast majority of folks are going to be. And then at that architect level, I think it becomes even a little bit, maybe even simpler, because you're going to have a certain level of acumen at that point that is going to be more measurable than, potentially the potential level that you might have in that early career area. So I think what you're trying to then do is figure out at each level of hiring, what are your strategies that go in and where are your most effective hires being made? And what we're finding is that with the advent of, skill-based hiring has basically evolved because the bachelor's degree has become an unreliable predictor of success in the workplace.
Yep.
Right? And it is also, to your point about diversity, a hurdle that not everyone has the privilege of climbing. Right?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it does not mean that someone does not have the ability to do a role in my business for sure. So there were 2 articles that came out this week that I actually pointed my business back to. One was about the federal government removing degree requirements from cyber jobs, which is overdue, well overdue,
way overdue.
Yeah, right. And then, because, you'll get military veterans coming out and they are far more qualified,
right,
and they've been doing the work, and maybe they have a degree, maybe they don't, maybe they're in the middle of it. Probably that's the case. But they wouldn't qualify for that, job, on the basis of how it had been written in a legacy fashion. And state governments are also starting to take a look at that. And once you start having those kinds of big movements in the market, that skill base becomes a lot more interesting. And, when you're looking at source and how you go about targeting, attracting, retaining that talent, it becomes a little bit of a different conversation. And those levels do become important for how you do that.
Let me ask you a stupid question here, Amy. When we look at those measurements of those particular groups that you were talking about, are we actually taking people's resumes and looking at them, or are we doing assessments on them either during the screening process or pre-hire? Where do we find out that they actually have this knowledge? Because obviously the resume and LinkedIn they're not really good, reliable sources of that.
Except for our profiles, which are completely, right?
Absolutely pristine. They're pristine.
They are spot on.
Okay.
But my LinkedIn profile does not have, it has the skills that I say I have, but they're not tested. They're not,
Right.
There's no, other than my certifications that I got from Johns Hopkins through Coursera, there's no stamp on them.
Right. No, there's not. And, and even if there were a stamp, there's no telling if once you actually got into a role, if you would be effective at it. And, so I think that some of what we do here can be very scientific, and I know this is a data podcast, so we want to make it as clean and as precise as we can. But in fact, we are still dealing with people. Yeah. And, and I'm of a mind that, to answer your question, it is, where I am, it's a mixture, and assessment can be used effectively to screen in or out based on certain criteria. It can be simple, like, how well does someone perform computational tasks or that kind of thing, if that is in fact part of the job. Although, we have things that do computational tasks for us pretty effectively. Am I right?
Can they use the software? Yep.
The Apple Watch.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You don't have to know the equation. You just have to know to plug it into the software. Yeah.
Exactly, Dwight. So maybe the challenge to your question, David, is that really are we asking the right questions?
And that's a really good question, because when people get filtered out, having gone through the process of putting in a resume to a job that I'm overly qualified for and getting sent back a 5-second later note that says, although your qualifications are very impressive, we're going to move on to other resumes.
Yeah.
Are you serious? In 5 seconds, somebody read my resume and said, yeah, he may be the best at this thing, but no, we have other people that are ahead of him.
Right.
Really?
Yeah, the systems don't work the way that we hope they'll work for us. But that's the to your point earlier, you were talking about the fact that this is a data podcast, but the ultimate piece of this is that there's both an art and a science to this.
Exactly.
We can put the data to it all we want. We can build out algorithms in the ATS, but at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, it's all about that one-to-one conversation that you have with the candidate. And David, to your point, being able to assess in some way or another, and hopefully you've got some tools to be able to assess that.
Right.
But nothing beats you got to have the art to it. You got to have the conversations that go with it.
Yeah, agree.
And I think this was what Amy was talking about creating a story around or a narrative around your data, right? Hey, are you listening to this and thinking to yourself, man, I wish I could talk to David about this? Well, you're in luck. We have a special offer for listeners of the HR Data Labs podcast. A free half-hour call with me about any of the topics we cover on the podcast or whatever is on your mind. Go to salary.com/HRDL consulting to schedule your free 30-minute call today. Why don't we talk a little bit about that? How do you create a narrative around the data that you use to recruit?
I think the first thing I do is figure out who my audience is, right? So if I am speaking with an executive audience, I am going to most closely align with the things that they have told me are important to them, which are usually things like how much revenue are we generating? How are our net promoter scores? Things like how are we perceived in the market by our job candidates and how are our workers portraying our EVP, our employee value proposition? So that's going to be the kind of stuff that I'm going to focus on at that level. If I'm managing somebody, I'm going to be looking really closely at what the volume of their activity is. How many people are we, how many recs are they holding? How quickly do they fill those requisitions? How many candidates does it take them to submit to a manager before we get through, enough interviews through? And how many interviews need to be had before we get a hire? Once we make that hire, how many of those offers are accepted? So I'm going to get really, really granular, and I already see your eyes glazing over because these are not interesting stats.
No, but they are interesting stats.
They are.
It gives you a picture.
We'll take more data than less.
Yeah. And just so you know, we're kind of weird with data. So for us, it is actually interesting. We're already doing further computations in our head as you're talking about these. That's the eyes glazed
White
over
and
that you think you're seeing.
Like thinking about the data dictionary. We're thinking about the data governance.
Right.
We're thinking about, how we're going to collect all this data, the benchmark we might get.
That's right.
We're with you.
That's right. So I would be, so if I'm going to be working with a recruiter, I'm going to be working with a different data set. If I'm working with a recruiting leader, I'm going to be looking at that data in aggregate and, and I'm going to be assessing, kind of a little bit like going back to the first part of our conversation. If I've got folks that are recruiting really high level architect and engineers, I'm going to have a different set of expectations than if I've got people recruiting, entry level or early career talent where we may have a larger pool and B, a different expectation set that can then be molded a little bit more based on who we get into the position.
And what kind of narrative are they looking for? I mean, obviously they're looking for, as you were saying, tell me how this impacts the business. Mm-hmm. How does it impact our NPS scores? But what if no one's listening? What do you do?
Yeah, so definitely been there. And, and there are some groups that just are not that interested in it. I don't know if it's that they're not interested in the data as much as sometimes, like, I usually know that I'm in a conversation that's not going to go anywhere from a recruiting perspective if we start talking about at the candidate level why somebody didn't accept the job or why this or why that. It's not actionable because it is personal.
Right.
So finding things like that out through feedback, and ultimately when I talk about data, I try to workshop it a little bit where I will talk to someone in advance and say, does this make sense? I had a boss who would tell me to explain it like he's a fifth grader. That was actually enormously helpful advice. If he's listening, he's probably smiling. He's probably like, she finally got it. Right?
Well, I have a fifth grader, so I completely understand.
Oh, well, good. Right. So we have someone we can practice on, right? So, so it's just figuring out like how much complexity can you eliminate? And, and one of the other things that, so I was a journalism major in college, which was incredibly useful, except for the fact that I mostly learned to be an effective written communicator. So sometimes I will write my communications until I have my story together. And, and then people will say, gosh, Amy, you're such a strong presenter. Okay. I'm a good reader. I'm a good reader. I'm actually not reading much today, but this is a topic that I'm pretty comfortable with and pretty familiar with.
Sure.
But if I was new to this, my advice to myself and anyone else who wants to tell a better data story would be to simplify complexity as much as possible. Try to explain it first to someone who is not in your business.
Right.
When their eyes glaze over, it is time to go back to the drawing board.
Well, yeah, I mean, the problem with trying to tell stories about data is that most of the time the person who's explaining it gets confused about what's the best methodology of being able to explain hard concepts for people to grasp. Like they start getting into statistics of, well, the median of this is this. No one cares about that. And if you say the average person, then they can kind of grasp what the average means. So when I coach people about telling stories, I actually tell them to ignore those things completely. Don't talk about the median. Don't talk about average. Don't talk about how the range of acceptable values would be. No one gives a crap about that. Yeah. Just say what you mean. Just tell people. And to your point about the fifth grader, yeah, you have to be able to meet people where they are. And while there is also a range of people who can accept and understand things, trying to get to the lowest common denominator sometimes will hit home.
Yeah. And I think that, the other thing that I think is important is repetition. And, so I started at Maximus a little over a year ago, and they didn't really have much of a data narrative around my practice. And my practice was relatively new. So I got to sort of come in and say, okay, I'm going to look at what's going on here. And I'm going to pick out what I think I can impact. And that's what we're going to talk about.
So you're coming from a position of strength then?
Well, that's true too. Yes. I mean, it doesn't mean that I wouldn't, that I won't go away and find the answers to more difficult questions or questions that I view as, previously viewed as not relevant. Right? Like, oh, wait, that was relevant? Yeah. So I think I think you're right. But I think that again, getting focused and staying out of the temptation to overkill people with so much. If you can hone in on a couple things that are really strongly impacting your business and then measure them effectively and do it consistently and tell a story consistently, I have been able to transform data narratives that way.
That can't be said any better. I've actually tried to teach people how to talk about telling stories around data, and that's exactly it right there in a nutshell. It was just such a pleasure, Amy. Thank you so much. I mean, this is a really great way for us to kind of get a little bit deeper into the recruiting world, especially with tech hires, and be able to understand the business problem, but also to be able to kind of communicate that business problem. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. Anything I can do to move the cause forward.
Well, you did a great job. Thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thanks, David. Thanks, Dwight.
Thank you, Dwight.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
And thank you all for listening. Take care and have a great day. And stay safe.
That was the HR Data Labs podcast. If you liked the episode, please subscribe. And if you know anyone that might like to hear it, please send it their way. Thank you for joining us this week, and stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe.